Keats at Teignmouth, spring 1818. By the wild sea wall I wandered, blinded by the salting sun, while the sulky channel thundered like an old Trafalgar gun. And I watched the gaudy river under trees of lemon green, coiling like a scarlet bugle through the valley of the Teign. When spring fired her fuselados, salt spray, sea spray on the sill, when the budding scarf of April ravelled on the Devon hill, then I saw the crystal poet leaning on the old sea rail. In his breast lay death, the lover, in his head the nightingale. Nursery rhyme of innocence and experience. I had a silver penny and an apricot tree, and I said to the sailor on the white quay, "Sailor, oh sailor, will you bring me, if I give you my penny and my apricot tree, a fez from Algeria, an Arab drum to beat, a little gilt sword, and a parakeet?" And he smiled and he kissed me as strong as death, and I saw his red tongue and I felt his sweet breath. "You may keep your penny and your apricot tree, and I'll bring your presents back from sea." Oh, the ship dipped down on the rim of the sky, and I waited while 3 long summers went by. Then, one still morning on the white quay, I saw a grey ship come in from sea. Slowly she came across the bay, for her flashing rigging was shot away. All round her wake the seabirds cried, and flew in and out of the hole in her side. Slowly she came in the path of the sun, and I heard the sound of a distant gun, and a stranger came running up to me from the deck of the ship, and he said he, "Oh, are you the boy who would wait on the quay with the silver penny and the apricot tree? I've a plum-coloured fez and a drum for thee, and a sword and a parakeet from over the sea." Oh, where is the sailor with bold red hair, and what is that volley on the bright air? Oh, where are the other girls and boys, and why have you brought me children's toys? Chief Petty Officer. He is older than the naval side of British history, and sits more permanent than the spider in the enormous wall. His barefoot, coal-burning soul expands, puffs like a toad in the convict air of the Royal Naval Barracks at Devonport. Here, in depot, is his stone nirvana, more real than the opium pipe, the uninteresting relics of his Edwardian Foreign Commission. And from his thick stone box he surveys with a prehistoric eye the hostilities only rating. He has the face of the dinosaur that sometimes stares from old Victorian naval photographs, that of some elderly lieutenant with boots and a celluloid crippen collar, brass buttons, and cruel, ambitious eyes of almond. He was probably made a Freemason in Hong Kong. He has a son on war work in the dockyard, and an appalling daughter in the Range. He writes on your draft chit, tobacco permit, or request form in a huge antique borstal hand, and pins notices on the board in the chief's mess requesting his messmates not to lay on the billiard table. He is an anti-Semite and has somewhat reactionary views, and reads the pictures in the Daily News. And when you return from the nervous Pacific, where the seas shift like sheets of plate glass in the dazzling morning, or when you return, browner than Alexander, from Malta, where you have leaned over the side in harbour and seen in the clear water the salmon tins, wrecks, and tiny explosions of crystal fish, a whole war later, he will still be sitting under a passer's clock, waiting for top time, his narrow forehead ruffled by the Jutland wind. At the grave of John Clare. Walking in the Sides churchyard around the locked church, walking among the oaks and snails and mossed inscriptions, at first we failed to find the grave, but a girl said, "There he is," There's John Clare. And we stood silent by the ridged stone, a stone of grey cheese. There were no flowers for the dead ploughman as the gilt clock fired off the hour, only the words, "A poet is born, not made." The dove-grey village lay in the Dutch landscape, the level crossing and the fields of wet barley, the almshouses, the school, the Ebenezer chapel, the 2 pubs, and the signpost to Stamford, to Maxey, from the pages of biography. And later, sitting in the church among the unstuffed hassocks and smoking a pipe on the gate at Maxey Crossing, I thought of the dead poet, of the books and letters in the Peterborough Museum, the huge mad writing, of the way he walked with one foot in the furrow, or hurried terrified as a child to fetch the flour from Maxey, expecting from every turn a Caliban, of London, Charles Lamb and Hazlitt, the bad grammar, the spelling, the invented words, and the poetry bursting like a diamond bomb. I thought of the last days, the old man sitting alone in the porch of All Saints in Northampton, and the dead poet trundling home to Helpston. Oh, Clare, your poetry, clear, translucent as your lovely name, I salute you with tears. And coming out on the green from the parting pot, I notice a bicycle tire hanging from the high stone feathers of your monument. King's College Chapel. When, to the music of bird or tallis, the ruffed boys singing in the blackened stalls, the candles lighting the small bones on their faces, the Tudors stiff in marble on the walls, there comes to evensong Elizabeth or Henry, rich with brocade, pearl, golden lilies at the altar, the scarlet lions leaping on their bosoms, pale royal hands fingering the crackling psalter. Henry is thinking of his lute and of backgammon. Elizabeth follows the waving song, the mystery, proud in her red wig and green jewelled favour. They sit in their white lawn sleeves, as cool as history. A voyage from Italy. Here, Signora, slept my sea-boy, windowed by the flashing bay, where the sea-wall spread her sickle and the leaping fish-boats lay. On the bright sea's breast, my sea-boy curling to a different day, the retreating lightship flashing like a childhood, far away, sailing to the glittering river or the fabled western strand, as the pilfering sea forever sidles on the crawling sand. In his eye the shell-pink blossoms, on his tongue the ilex tree, his hair the corn with yellow thunder holds the headland from the sea. Nevermore he comes, Signora, the looping fountain silent stands. He lies stiff in the bragging cliff, the blue sea holly in his hands. The seasons in North Cornwall. Oh, spring has set off her green fuses down by the Tamar today, and careless, like tide marks, the hedges are bursting with almond and may. Here lie I waiting for old summer, a red face and straw-coloured hair as he. I shall meet him on the road from Marazion and the Mediterranean Sea. September has flung a spray of rooks on the sea chart of the sky. The tall shipmasts crack in the forest and the banners of autumn fly. My room is a bright glass cabin. All Cornwall thunders at my door, and the white ships of winter lie in the sea roads of the moor. Plymouth. Soft as the night and silent as the snow, rain pours her arrows on the open city. The sailor and his fancy homeward go, and evening draws its shutter as in pity. Walking the sliding pavements, my feet fiery as angels on the blazing stair, I heard a strangling cornet in the street volley its music on the falling air. Blow, cornet, Blow over the lurching channel where the sleek sea forever draws her comb. A million matelots in the long sea tunnel hear your thin rumours and remember home. Cornwall. One day, friend and stranger, the granite beast will rise, rubbing the salt sea from his 100 eyes, sleeping no longer. In the running river he will observe the tree, forging the slow signature of summer, and like Caliban he will stumble and clamour, crying, I am free, I am free. Night bears her silver wounds in the sky and flees from the shouting sun. O monster, what spear, what rock gun shall storm the fortress of your clear eyes? Your teeth sharpened by many gliding waters, lying awash in the snarling tide, how long must you wait to ride swagged with thunder on lovers and traitors? Cast off your coloured stone ropes, signal the tourney, and to the bells of many drowned chapels sail away, monster, leaving only ripples written in water to tell of your journey. I saw a shot-down angel. I saw a shot-down angel in the park, his marble blood sluicing the dyke of death, a sailing tree firing its brown sea mark where he now wintered for his wounded breath. I heard the bird noise of his splintered wings sawing the steep sierra of the sky. On his fixed brow the jewel of the kings reeked the red morning with a starving eye. I stretched my hand to hold him from the heat. I fetched a cloth to bind him where he bled. I brought a bowl to wash his golden feet. I shone my shield to save him from the dead. My angel spat my solace in my face and fired my fingers with his burning shawl, crawling in blood and silver to a place where he could turn his torture to the wall. Alone I wandered in the sneaking snow, the signature of murder on my day, and from the gallows tree a careful crow hitched its appalling wings and flew away. I am the great sun. I am the great sun, but you do not see me. I am your husband, but you turn away. I am the captive, but you do not free me. I am the captain, you will not obey. I am the truth, but you will not believe me. I am the city where you will not stay. I am your wife, your child, but you will leave me. I am that God to whom you will not pray. I am your counsel, but you do not hear me. I am the lover whom you will betray. I am the victor, but you do not cheer me. I am the holy dove whom you will slay. I am your life, but if you will not name me, seal up your soul with tears and never blame me. At the British War Cemetery by Yeux. I walked where in their talking graves and shirts of earth 5,000 lay, when history with 10 feasts of fire had eaten the red air away. I am Christ's boy, I cried. I bear in iron hands the bread, the fishes. I hang with honey and with rose this tidy wreck of all your wishes. On your geometry of sleep the chestnut and the fir tree fly, and lavender and marguerite forge with their flowers an English sky. Turn now towards the belling town your jigsaws of impossible bone, and rising, read your rank of snow accurate as death upon the stone. About your easy heads my prayers I said with syllables of clay. What gift, I asked, shall I bring now before I weep and walk away? Take, they replied, the oak and laurel, take our fortune of tears, and live like a spendthrift lover. All we ask is the one gift you cannot give. Timothy Winters. Timothy Winters comes to school with eyes as wide as a football pool.
ears like bombs and teeth like splinters, a blitz of a boy is Timothy Winters. His belly is white, his neck is dark, and his hair is an exclamation mark. His clothes are enough to scare a crow, and through his breeches the blue winds blow. When teacher talks he won't hear a word, and he shoots down dead the arithmetic bird. He licks the patterns off his plate, and he's not even heard of the welfare state. Timothy Winters has bloody feet, and he lives in a house on Suez Street. He sleeps in a sack on the kitchen floor, and they say there aren't boys like him any more. Old man Winters likes his beer, and his missus ran off with a bombardier. Grandma sits in the grate with a gin, and Timothy's dosed with an aspirin. The welfare worker lies awake, but the law's as tricky as a 10-foot snake. So Timothy Winters drinks his cup and slowly goes on growing up. At morning prayers the master helves for children less fortunate than ourselves, and the loudest response in the room is when Timothy Winters roars, "Amen." So come, one angel, come on 10. Timothy Winters says, "Amen, amen, 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 amen. Timothy Winters, Lord, amen." Innocent Song. Who's that knocking on the window? Who's that standing at the door? What are all those presents lying on the kitchen floor? Who is the smiling stranger with hair as white as gin? What is he doing with the children, and who could have let him in? Why has he rubies on his fingers, a cold, cold crown on his head? Why, when he caws his carol, does the salty snow run red? Why does he ferry my fireside as a spider on a thread, his fingers made of fuses and his tongue of gingerbread? Why does the world before him melt in a million suns? Why do his yellow yearning eyes burn like saffron buns? Watch where he comes walking out of the Christmas flame, dancing, double talking. Herod is his name. The Ballad of Charlotte Diamond. It was a Sunday evening, and in the April rain, that Charlotte went from our house and never came home again. Her shawl of diamond red cloth, she wore a yellow gown, she carried the green gauze handkerchief she bought in Bodmin Town. About her throat her necklace, and in her purse her pay, the 4 silver shillings she had at Lady Day. In her purse 4 shillings, and in her purse her pride, as she walked out one evening, her lover at her side. Out beyond the marshes where the cattle stand, with her crippled lover limping at her hand. Charlotte walked with Matthew through the Sunday mist, never saw the razor waiting at his wrist. Charlotte, she was gentle, but they found her in the flood, her Sunday beads among the reeds beaming with her blood. Matthew, where is Charlotte, and wherefore has she flown? For you walked out together, and now are come alone. Why do you not answer? Stand silent as a tree, your Sunday worsted stockings all muddied to the knee. Why do you mend your breastplate with a rusty needle's thread, and fall with fears and silent tears upon your single bed? Why do you sit so sadly, your face the colour of clay, and with a green gauze handkerchief wipe the sour sweat away? Has she gone to Blisland to seek an easier place? And is that why your eye won't dry and blinds your bleaching face? Take me home, cried Charlotte. I lie here in the pit. A red rock rests upon my breasts, and my naked neck is split. Her skin was soft as sable, her eyes were wide as day, her hair was blacker than the bog that licked her life away. Her cheeks were made of honey, her throat was made of flame, where all around the razor had written its red name. As Matthew turned at Plymouth about the tilting hoe, the cold and cunning constable up to him did go. I've come to take you, Matthew, under the magistrate's door. Come quiet now, you pretty poor boy, and you must know what for. She is as pure, cried Matthew, as is the early dew. Her only stain, it is the pain that round her neck I drew. She is as guiltless as the day she sprang forth from her mother. The only sin upon her skin is that she loved another. They took him off to Bodmin, they pulled the prison bell, they sent him smartly up to heaven, and dropped him down to hell. All through the granite kingdom, and on its travelling airs, ask, which of these two lovers the most deserves your prayers? And your steel heart search, stranger, that you may pause and pray for lovers who come not to bed upon their wedding day, but lie upon the moorland where stands the sacred snow, above the breathing river, and the salt sea winds go. By St. Thomas Water. By St. Thomas Water, where the river is thin, we looked for a jam jar to catch the quick fish in. Through St. Thomas churchyard, Jessie and I ran the day we took the jam pot off the dead man. On the scuffed tombstone the grey flowers fell, cracked was the water, silent the shell. The snake for an emblem swirled on the slab. Across the beach of sky the sun crawled like a crab. If we walk, said Jessie, 7 times round, we shall hear a dead man speaking underground. Round the stone we danced, we sang, watched the sun drop, laid our heads and listened at the tomb top. Soft as the thunder at the storm's start, I heard a voice as clear as blood, strong as the heart. But what words were spoken I can never say. I shut my fingers round my head, drove them away. What are those letters, Jessie, cut so sharp and trim, all round this holy stone with earth up to the brim? Jessie traced the letters, black as coffin lead. He is not dead, but sleeping, slowly she said. I looked at Jessie, Jessie looked at me, and our eyes in wonder grew wide as the sea. Past the green and bending stones we fled hand in hand, silent through the tongues of grass to the river strand. By the creaking cypress we moved as soft as smoke, for fear all the people underneath awoke. Over all the sleepers we darted light as snow, in case they opened up their eyes, called us from below. Many a day has faltered into many a year since the dead awoke and spoke, and we would not hear. Waiting in the cold grass, under a crinkled bough, quiet stone, cautious stone, what do you tell me now? A Short Life of Neville Northey Bernard. Here lived Bernard, who with his fingers bone broke syllables of light from the moorstone, spat on the genesis of dust and clay, rubbed with sure hands the blinded eyes of day, and through the seasons of the talking sun walked, calm as God, the fields of Alternun. Here, where St. Nonna with a holy reed hit the bare granite, made the waters bleed, madmen swam to their wits in her clear well. Young Bernard fasted, watched, learned how to tell stone beads under the stream, and at its knock quietly lifted out his prize of rock. As Michelangelo, by stone possessed, sucked the green marble from his mother's breast, so Bernard, at his shoulder the earth's weight, received on his child's tongue wafers of slate, and when he heard his granite hour strike, murdered Christ's hangman with a mason's spike. The village sprawled white as a marriage bed. Gulls from the north coast stumbled overhead as Bernard, standing in the churchyard hay, leaned on the stiff light, hacked childhood away. On the tomb slabs watched bugler, saint, dove, under his beating fists grow big with love. The boy with the Laocoon snake crown caught with a 6-inch nail the stinking town. He turned as Midas meant a stone, then gold. Forgot, he said, what it was to be cold. Birds rang like coins. He spread his fingers wide. Wider the gulfs of love as his child died. Packing only his heart, a half-hewn stone, he left house, clothes, goods, blundered off alone, London to Cornwall and the spinning moor, slept in stacks, hedges, barns, retraced the spoor of innocence, through the lost shallows walked, of his dead child, they say, forever talked. At last, the dragged November sun on high, Bernard lay in a mumper's inn to die, at Redruth workhouse with the stripped, insane, banged on death's door and did not bang in vain. Rocked in a gig to sleep in pauper's clay, where 3 more warmed his side till judgment day. No mourner stood to tuck him in God's bed, only the coffin pusher. Overhead, the fishing rooks unravelling the hour, 2 men, a boy, restored Camborne church tower. This box, the clerk said, holds your man in place. We come, they said, to smooth dirt from his face. No cross marks the spot where he first saw day. Time with a knife wears the dull flesh away, peels the soft skin of blocks cut on the green, signed by a boy, Bernard, sculptor, 13. Slowly the land shakes as the ocean's gun sounds over Cornwall. He stares from the sun. The torn tramp, rough with talents, walks the park. Children have swift stones ready. Men, dogs bark. The light falls on the bay. The cold sea leaks. The slate face flushes, opens its lips, speaks. In from the moor the pointing shadows flock. Finger beneath the river, the pure rock. Dockacre. 2 doors away, at Dockacre, a ghost in an isosceles cap assembles just before dawn, jerks round the ripped garden, through the dog gates and up the buckled stairs, quietly playing a flute. Often, sleepless in a bland electric glare, since I slept on the mess deck, to wake up without a pilot light gives me the feeling I'm going to be drowned. I've tried to hear it rounding the hollyhocks for the front door, but so far it's always been the paper train. The ghost's name is Nicholas Hurl, once High Sheriff of Cornwall. On the wall at Dockacre there's a creamy portrait of the wife who was shot by accident, stabbed or driven mad. No one seems quite certain which, though probably it was the last. In a curled account, he shut the girl in a dark room, trying to starve her to sanity. She died of the cure on Christmas Day 1714, and Nicholas left for Hampstead. But we've never forgotten her, or him. My neighbour still has the bald flute. It's part of a cane walking stick. He kindly offered to play it to me once, but I declined, fearing that I might hear it again in the chopped hours. Nicholas playing his inaccurate, sad tunes as I whistled mine, both of us suffering from the same malaise that evidently even death won't cure. I feared that as I looked towards my bedroom door, I should see the handle break slowly into flames, then turn. Ballad of the Bread Man. Mary stood in the kitchen, baking a loaf of bread. An angel flew in through the window. "We've a job for you," he said. God, in his big gold heaven, sitting in his big blue chair, wanted a mother for his little son, suddenly saw you there. Mary shook and trembled. "It isn't true what you say." "Don't say that," said the angel. "The baby's on its way." Joseph was in the workshop, planing a piece of wood. "The old man's past it," the neighbours said. "That girl's been up to no good. And who was that elegant fellow," they said, "in the shiny gear?" Things they said about Gabriel were hardly fit to hear. Mary never answered. Mary never replied. She kept the information, like the baby, safe inside. It was election winter. They went to vote in town. When Mary found her time had come, the hotels let her down. The baby was born in an annex next to the local pub. At midnight, a delegation turned up from the Farmers' Club. They talked about an explosion that made a hole in the sky, said they'd been sent to the Lamb and Flag to see God come down from on high. A few days later, a bishop and a 5-star general were seen with the head of an African country in a bulletproof limousine. "We've come," they said, "with tokens for the little boy to choose," told the tale about war and peace in the television news.
After them came the soldiers with rifle and bomb and gun, looking for enemies of the state. The family had packed and gone. When they got back to the village, the neighbours said to a man, "That boy will never be one of us, though he does what he blessed well can." He went round to all the people, a paper crown on his head. "Here is some bread from my father. Take, eat," he said. Nobody seemed very hungry. Nobody seemed to care. Nobody saw the God in himself quietly standing there. He finished up in the papers. He came to a very bad end. He was charged with bringing the living to life. No man was that prisoner's friend. There's only one kind of punishment to fit that kind of a crime. They rigged a trial and shot him dead. They were only just in time. They lifted the young man by the leg. They lifted him by the arm. They locked him in a cathedral in case he came to harm. They stored him safe as water under 7 rocks. One Sunday morning he burst out like a jack-in-the-box. Through the town he went walking. He showed them the holes in his head. "Now do you want any loaves?" he cried. "Not today," they said. John Polrudden. John Polrudden all of a sudden went out of his house one night when a privateer came sailing near under his window light. They saw his jugs, his plates and mugs, his hearth as bright as brass, his gews and gauze and kicks and shaws all through their spying glass. They saw his wine, his silver shine, they heard his fiddlers play. "Tonight," they said, out of his bed, "Polrudden we'll take away." And from a skiff they climbed the cliff and crossed the salt-wet lawn, and as they crept, Polrudden slept the night away to dawn. "In air or ground, what is that sound?" Polrudden said, and stirred. They breathed. "Be still, it was the shrill of the scritch-owl you heard." "Oh, yet again I hear it plain, but do I wake or dream?" In morning's fog the otter dog is whistling by the stream. Now from the sea what comes for me beneath my window dark? Lie still, my dear, all that you hear is the red fox's bark. Swift from his bed Polrudden was sped before the day was white, and head and feet wrapped in a sheet they bore him down the height, and nevermore through his own door Polrudden went nor came, though many a tide has turned beside the cliff that bears his name. On stone and brick was ivy thick, and the grey roof was thin, and winter's gale with fists of hail broke all the windows in. The chimney crown it tumbled down, and up grew the green, till on the cliff it was as if a house had never been. But when the moon swims late or soon across St. Austell Bay, what sight, what sound haunts air and ground where once Polrudden lay? It is the high white scritch-owl's cry, the fox as dark as blood, and on the hill the otter still whistles beside the flood. I saw a jolly hunter. I saw a jolly hunter with a jolly gun, walking in the country in the jolly sun. In the jolly meadow sat a jolly hare. Saw the jolly hunter, took jolly care. Hunter jolly eager, sight of jolly prey, forgot gun pointing wrong jolly way. Jolly hunter, jolly head over heels gone. Jolly old safety catch, not jolly on. Bang went the jolly gun, hunter jolly dead. Jolly hare got clean away, jolly good, I said. Mary, Mary Magdalene. Mary, Mary Magdalene, lying on the wall, I throw a pebble on your back, will it lie or fall? Send me down for Christmas some stockings and some hose, and send before the winter's end a brand new suit of clothes. Mary, Mary Magdalene, under a stony tree, I throw a pebble on your back, what will you send me? I'll send you for your christening a woolen robe to wear, a shiny cup from which to sup, and a name to bear. Mary, Mary Magdalene, lying cool as snow,
What will you be sending me when to school I go? I'll send a pencil and a pen that write both clean and neat, and I'll send to the schoolmaster a tongue that's kind and sweet. Mary, Mary Magdalene, lying in the sun, what will you be sending me now I'm 21? I'll send you down a locket as silver as your skin, and I'll send you a lover to fit a gold key in. Mary, Mary Magdalene, underneath the spray, what will you be sending me on my wedding day? I'll send you down some blossom, some ribbons and some lace, and for the bride a veil to hide the blushes on her face. Mary, Mary Magdalene, whiter than the swan, tell me what you'll send me now my good man's dead and gone. I'll send to you a single bed on which you must lie, and pillows bright where tears may light that fall from your eye. Mary, Mary Magdalene, now 9 months are done, what will you be sending me for my little son? I'll send you for your baby a lucky stone and small, to throw to Mary Magdalene, lying on the wall. My mother saw a dancing bear. My mother saw a dancing bear by the schoolyard, a day in June. The keeper stood with chain and bar and whistle pipe and played a tune. And Bruin lifted up its head and lifted up its dusty feet, and all the children laughed to see it caper in the summer heat. They watched as for the Queen it died. They watched it march, they watched it halt. They heard the keeper as he cried, "Now roly-poly, somersault." And then, my mother said, there came the keeper with a begging cup, the bear with burning coat of fur, shaming the laughter to a stop. They paid a penny for the dance, but what they saw was not the show, only, in Bruin's aching eyes, far distant forests and the snow. Who? Who is that child I see wandering, wandering, down by the side of the quivering stream? Why does he seem not to hear, though I call to him? Where does he come from, and what is his name? Why do I see him at sunrise and sunset, taking, in old-fashioned clothes, the same track? Why, when he walks, does he cast not a shadow, though the sun rises and falls at his back? Why does the dust lie so thick on the hedgerow by the great field where the horse pulls the plough? Why do I see only meadows, where houses stand in a line by the riverside now? Why does he move like a wraith by the water, soft as the thistledown on the breeze blown? When I draw near him so that I may hear him, why does he say that his name is my own? My Uncle Johnny, known as Silent Jack, suffered, despite his name, no special lack of words, just kept them growling in his skull, jerking their tails, or lying half awake till, without warning, like some starving backyard greyhound, one would scud out for the kill, frayed flesh, torn fur, or else to chase a joke around the bar until it burst and bled under Jack's marble eye, then dropped down dead. At Uncle Johnny's house, I'd watch him take his dinner sitting by the red-tongued grate. Self-banished, cracking fingers stiff as thorn, he'd gently breathe a safe and separate air, unseen by others, prick my huge child's stare with a sharp wink, penal in socks, and sworn by pomegranate-faced aunts not to swear. And then, when the fouled clock struck 1:10, he and his swag of walling tools had gone. I heard his drenched voice waver through the park, and onward Christian soldiers at the dark, thumps on the black-tarred door. Aunts spiked the way. "You're frightening the boy." I hoped he'd stay, for all the time I knew it was a play. But seeing me, he stopped and turned and fled,
And when an orchard apple sniped his head, thought it a shot, died in the dry field drain, but resurrected with the day again. In 80 years he never ventured far past the Longstone, but for Lord Kitchener. Scarecrowed in khaki, kitted out with rum, puttees unrolled like tablets of the law. They tried to teach him how to shoot the Hun, but fighting was an art not Uncle John's. Came first, they said, in the retreat from Mons, and all his country's scholarship revived in bloody situations, and survived. Though now he's underneath this hump of grass, and named and numbered on the written brass, I see him slowly wiping tine and blade, listening to a hot-cheeked boy who took geese not for swans, but ducks. Jack let that pass, a healing smile. It's each man to his trade. 6.5 worn words from silent Jack, where all around his dry stone speeches stand printed across the strong page of the land. A wedding portrait. Young man, young woman, gazing out straight-backed, straight-eyed, from what would seem a cloud of sepia and cream. In your twin pairs of eyes I note a sense of the ridiculous, innocent courage, the strange hope things might get better in the lean year of the Lusitania. Gas used at the front, Arras and Ypres more than place names. 1915. My father, driver Causley, stands speckless in 2nd Wessex kit, a riding crop in ordered hands, lanyard well slicked and buttons lit with brasso, military cap on the fake pillar for an urn. Khaki roughens his neck. I see the mouth half lifted by a scrap of smile. It is a shock to learn how much, at last, he looks like me. Serene, my mother wears a white and Sunday look, and at her throat the vague smudge of a brooch, a mute pale wound of coral. The smooth weight of hair curves from her brow. Gold chain circles a wrist to mark the day. And on the other is the grey twist of a bandage for the flame that tongued her flesh, as if to say, I am those days that are to come. As I walk by them on the stair, a small surprise of sun, a ruse of light, gives each a speaking air, a sudden thrust, though both refuse, silent as fish or water plants, to break the narrow stream of glass dividing us. I was nowhere that wedding day, and the pure glance they shaft me with acknowledges nothing of me. I am not here. The unregarding look appears to say, somehow, man is a breath, and at the end hides in the fire, in bolting water or the earth. I am a child again, and move sunwards these images of clay, listening for their first birth cry. And with the breath my parents gave, I warm the cold words with my day, will the dead wait to fly, to fly.